The Never Biden movement is a political faction made up mainly of progressives and former Bernie Sanders backers who refuse to throw their support behind the presumptive Democratic nominee for President of the United States, Joe Biden. Not to be confused with the Never Biden movement, a non-existent coalition made up of formerly patient people who now refuse to bide their time. Never Biden is essentially a more inclusive version of the longer-lived Bernie or bust philosophy and accompanying hashtag, one that easily allows for the recruitment of the former supporters of other Democratic candidates who lost in the primary race. And hear me now, quote me later, it's only a matter of time before the hashtag is co-opted by the right wing, who generally oppose Biden for completely different reasons. But for now, the movement and hashtag represents non-Bidenites of the left. And in this video, I'm going to talk about them. Why this voting bloc is important, why many progressives are refusing to support the Democratic nominee, and because I am a progressive myself, I'd like to weigh in on the strategy implicit in playing hardball with the Democratic Party. While some Never Biden progressives are taking the stand on principle, no doubt many see it as a tactic to push the Democratic Party toward the left. But whether the gambit would pay off in the long run is a very real question. So for progressives hoping for that outcome, and considering whether they should back Biden or join the Never Bideners, I'll attempt to answer this question: what should they do? If you're a proud Joe Biden supporter, or even a moderately satisfied one, the refusal of many progressives to support the nominee must be frustrating. Generally speaking, determining the direction of a party is meant to happen during the primary, and once the party leader is chosen, there's an expectation that voters will coalesce around that nominee. Of course, back in 2016, not backing Hillary Clinton would have been a pretty understandable stance for Bernie backers to take. She had incredibly low favorability ratings, even before that primary race began. There were clear shenanigans that occurred during the contest, making the result pretty hard to swallow, and while it's almost impossible now to remember the atmosphere we all lived in, at the time it was widely believed that she would be a shoo-in to trounce Donald Trump in the general election. None of these factors exist today. Joe Biden is amongst the more popular Democrats in the party, at least he was last year. While Biden clearly enjoyed an advantage in how he was portrayed in the mainstream press, and Sanders' momentum was arguably slightly deflated by the snail's pace reporting of the Iowa primary results, there is little evidence to suggest that serious insider table tilting was taking place in the 2020 Democratic primary race of the kind reported by WikiLeaks about 2016. And the idea that Biden will trounce Donald Trump in the general election is a belief held by few, perhaps just one out of every 331 million Americans. Specifically, this man.
I'm gonna beat this man like a drum.
I'll beat him like a drum.
I will beat him like a drum.
And yet, the Never Biden movement is not just a fringe corner of Twitter. Those supporting the idea go well beyond what politicians are traditionally advised to ignore: trolls, bots, and everyday Americans. No, actual famous people, celebrated journalists, and uncelebrated online media stars are rejecting the Democratic frontrunner.
If the choice is Donald Trump or Joe Biden, you can mark me down as officially undecided.
But I think they're both beyond the pale, to the point where I'm not gonna cast a vote for a war criminal rapist.
If you continue to empower and support this neoliberal, corporatist, militarist wing of a party over and over and over again, now we're supporting Hillary Clinton, now we're supporting Joe Biden. What is the point of politics if that's what you're doing?
Most people aren't interested in voting for candidates who treat them like crap and view them with utter contempt.
Not everyone on the left is convinced, however. Here's what Noam Chomsky had to say about not voting for Biden.
So let's take the position, never Biden. I'm not going to vote for Biden. No, there is such a thing. There's a thing called arithmetic. We can debate a lot of things, but not arithmetic. Failure to vote for Biden in this election in a swing state amounts to voting for Trump. Takes one vote away from the opposition, same as adding one vote to Trump.
Now, whether you agree with Noam Chomsky or the people who are obviously heartbroken that Chomsky disagrees with them,
He's just a really special guy.
disenchanted progressives are certainly a group worth thinking about, learning about, and listening to. If for no other reason than the fact that Democrats probably cannot win a general election if progressive voters don't turn out to vote. At his peak, Bernie's support was around 2/3 that of Joe Biden. Sure, Sanders voters didn't turn out enough in the primaries, but his supporters, generally speaking younger voters, are more likely to turn out in the general. And without a solid turnout amongst young people, no Democrat has a strong chance of beating a Republican president. This is especially true if you consider just how close some of the races were in the 2016 election. The states of Michigan, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin were all won or lost by 1% or less. In critical swing states Pennsylvania and Florida, the difference was just about 1.2%. So if Sanders supporters make up about 2/5 of the Democratic Party, whether or not Biden is able to scoop up their support could easily make or break him in the general election. So, now that we know progressives are important to win over, let's move on to the question of why some of them are so fickle. Since I opened this piece empathizing with Biden supporters, it seems only fair that we should also take a moment to empathize with progressives who are dissatisfied with Biden. Let's be honest, there are a lot of problems with Biden. As far as non-policy issues go, Joe Biden entered the primary race as a somewhat mixed figure. Many welcome the sight of the affable geezer who thinks he's best friends with President Obama. He's the goofy guy from those memes. Sure, sometimes he speaks out of turn, he's prone to gaffe, but he's a familiar face, like an uncle. For others, he was seen only slightly differently, as the affable goofy uncle who you would never under any circumstances leave alone with your kids. A privileged horn dog who's made a habit of kissing the backs of heads and smelling women's hair. This is genuinely worth noting. Recall, Biden had to apologize about inappropriate touching right at the beginning of his campaign.
Social norms have begun to change, they've shifted, and the boundaries of protecting personal space have been reset. And I get it.
It was also the first thing Trump attacked him on with this trollish video on Twitter.
Man, young, old, it's the way I've always been. It's the way I've tried to show I care about them and I'm listening.
Really, I don't know why Trump is complaining. He's probably the only person in the world with hair that even Joe Biden doesn't want to sniff. By the end of the Democratic primary race, we learned more about Biden's history with women, one that appears now unambiguously dark. Former staffer Tara Reade has made credible accusations about behavior that is not just inappropriate, but immoral and illegal. Of course, Trump has also been accused of similar deeds by at least 23 women since the 1980s. But that does not erase what Biden's allegedly done, and I can imagine that victims of similar incidents and their friends and families might have trouble with the idea that they have to pick which of the two predators they want to vote for. Now, I genuinely believe that everyone should be treated as innocent until proven guilty. But this is a difficult line to feed to Democrats who have been told not to trust Trump or Brett Kavanaugh over extremely credible but nevertheless unproven accusations, particularly not in the face of the fact that influential people within the Me Too movement apparently disregarded the Biden accusations while they pressed on with others. There's a fundamental hypocrisy with the idea that we should believe women as long as they are the alleged victim of a Republican. Personal issues aside, most progressives are far more persuaded by policy. And here Biden's agenda is a bit depressing for lefties. He does not support the Green New Deal or UBI or tuition-free public college or the biggest of them all, Medicare for all. We knew this, or probably could have guessed it, at the outset of the Democratic primary. But nearer to the end of the race, Biden seemed to get worse, not better, on the most critical issue of all. When he was asked whether he would veto a softened version of Medicare for all, even if it passed through Congress, Biden refused to say that he would not.
Let's flash forward. Your president, Bernie Sanders, is still active in the Senate. He manages to get Medicare for all through the Senate in some compromised version, the Elizabeth Warren version or other version. Nancy Pelosi gets a version of it through the House of Representatives. It comes to your desk. Do you veto it?
I would veto anything that delays providing the security and the certainty of health care being available now. If they got that through and by some miracle, there was an epiphany that occurred, and some miracle occurred that said, okay, it's passed, then you got to look at the cost. I want to know, how did they find the $35 trillion? What is that doing? Is it going to significantly raise taxes on the middle class, which it will? What's going to happen? Look, my opposition isn't to the principle that you should have Medicare. I mean, everybody, healthcare should be a right in America. My opposition relates to whether or not, A, it's doable, two, what the cost is, and what the consequences for the rest of the budget are. How are you going to find $35 trillion over the next 10 years?
This is extremely disheartening for progressives who see single-payer healthcare as the best policy. Still, it is not logical to conclude that Biden being disappointing on this issue means he's worse than Trump. Biden's plan for healthcare is to protect and build on the ACA, aka Obamacare. As part of this, he supports the creation of a public option. Trump, on the other hand, has done much to unravel the limited progress made by the ACA. He's eliminated the individual mandate. He's stopped paying out certain cost control subsidies to insurance companies, which has had the effect of pricing low-income people out of ACA-compliant insurance plans. He's allowed states to add work requirements to Medicaid. He's extended the amount of time in which private insurers could provide skinny plans, and he's cut funding to programs that inform citizens about insurance exchanges and help them to sign up for coverage. While neither Trump or Biden supports a single-payer healthcare system, it seems quite clear that Biden's public option would be a more progressive healthcare plan than the status quo. And Trump's continued attempts to unravel the ACA move the healthcare system closer to being a laissez-faire private market, essentially the opposite of a single-payer system. Still, it's not just that Biden is less progressive than progressives might hope. There are even areas where Trump might actually be more progressive than Biden. For some, Trump's attempt at negotiating with Kim Jong-un indicates that he is more open to creating a conflict-free world than neoliberals like Biden. For others, Trump's criticism of the original NAFTA and rejection of TPP indicate that he is more interested in labor-friendly trade agreements. I would hardly argue that, on a whole, Biden is not distinctly to the left of Trump. He certainly is. But if the issues I just mentioned are the ones that you hold dearest in your heart, it's pretty hard to argue that you should simply ignore them and get in line. At the same time, for most progressives, the problem is not with acknowledging that Biden is the lesser of two evils. Most progressives acknowledge that he is.
I think it is true that Biden is not as bad as Trump.
Let's assume that Trump really is the lesser, the worst of the two evils.
The trouble is that the lesser of two evils is still evil. And the more the lines between the two begin to blur, the harder it is to hold your nose and vote for somewhat evil. And this is where we must turn the conversation from why some progressives might not like Biden to a conversation about whether voting for him or not is likely to be strategically advantageous. In particular, whether it will address a generational concern for the American left, the perceived rightward creep of the Overton Window. For those unfamiliar, the Overton Window is a term describing the range of views that the public can accept. In society, some ideas are considered fringe. In contemporary America, for example, the idea that the proletariat ought to forcibly seize control of the means of production in order to force the bourgeois out of power is outside the Overton Window, as is, for example, the idea that all legitimate law comes from the one true creator, several blessings be upon her, at least for the time being. Inside the Overton Window are any ideas that are widely held, even if they contradict other mainstream beliefs. Some examples may include oil companies deserve tax subsidies, or we should eliminate nuclear power, or everyone gets to pick their own personal pronouns, or everyone must use bathrooms according to their anatomy at birth. Expanding the Overton Window is implicitly something Bernie Sanders brags about when he talks about how his 2016 campaign brought ideas like the $15 minimum wage into the mainstream.
3 years ago, during our 2016 campaign, when we brought forth our progressive agenda, we were told that our ideas were radical and they were extreme. We were told that Medicare for all, a $15 an hour minimum wage, free tuition at public colleges and universities, aggressively combating climate change, demanding that the wealthy start paying their fair share of taxes. We were told that all of these concepts were ideas that the American people would never accept. Well, 3 years have come and gone, and as a result of millions of Americans standing up and fighting back, all of these policies and more are now supported by a majority of Americans.
This was a particularly effective brag for Bernie to make because many liberals and progressives have seen themselves on the losing end of an Overton window shift that began with Ronald Reagan and was solidified by Bill Clinton. Clinton's general election strategy was essentially to move to the right, scoop up the moderates, knowing full well that the left will still choose him over a Republican. If the Democratic Party pursues a strategy of scooping up the middle, the best case scenario for progressives is that Republicans pursue the same strategy, which in turn makes elections essentially meaningless, a choice between Coke and Pepsi. What might actually be happening is worse. The Democrats scoop to the middle and Republicans hold their ground. It's in fact arguable that it's even worse than that. Consider the last 3 Republican presidents: George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. There's a reasonable argument to make, depending on how you look at it, that each has been more radically right-wing than the last. If that's generally been the case, then what you get is the Overton window shifting always to the right, with progressives being left out in the cold. What exactly the Democratic Party does is crucial here. If Democrats refuse to shift rightward, even if Republicans move that way, whatever the Democrats stand for will continue to remain in the mainstream according to the popular imagination. Not surprisingly, Glenn Greenwald specifically mentions the rightward shift of Democrats when talking about his refusal to support Joe Biden.
Now, after you have the 1990s in which Bill Clinton very successfully led the effort to transform the Democratic Party from one of the working class to one of Wall Street, Silicon Valley, banks, credit card companies, and the military industrial complex, those differences have diminished greatly, which isn't to say they don't exist any longer. Let's assume that Trump really is the lesser, the worst of the two evils, which I think could be debated, at least in some sectors, though not in others. We've been following this advice that says, even though we can't stand the Democratic leader, the Democratic Party leadership, even though they believe in things completely anathema to what we believe in, it's still our duty at the end of the day to pledge our unconditional support to them. When you pledge your unconditional support to politicians, meaning when you say, like Chomsky does, no matter who you pick, no matter how adverse he is to my political ideology and my set of policy preferences, I'm going to vote for you. I'm going to support you. They start to realize that you have no leverage. There's no reason for them to do anything but ignore you. Why would I give you concessions if you've already told me that at the end of the day, you're going to vote for me anyway? I'm not going to give you concessions. I'll give concessions to the people who may not vote for me, meaning centrists or Republicans or disaffected suburbanites or whatever. So that's one problem with that strategy, is it guarantees your own impotence.
This should serve to illustrate why progressives might be hesitant to automatically support the Democratic nominee. Because primary voters tend to be older than general election voters, and progressive voters tend to be younger, even fair Democratic primaries can be expected to lead to the nomination of more centrist candidates than the overall voting base of the party. Not surprisingly, if you look at everyone the Democrats have nominated over the past few decades, they tend to be candidates from the moderate New Democratic caucus, essentially the caucus of Bill Clinton. Also noteworthy, when these candidates win, they tend to represent change, as Pete Buttigieg has pointed out a few times, despite the fact that they still tended to govern fairly moderately, as, to the best of my knowledge, Pete Buttigieg has not pointed out. The tendency for progressives to lose in primaries is also especially disheartening this time around. Bernie Sanders, love him or hate him, was a uniquely viable progressive candidate, essentially about the best you could expect the left to put up. He came in second place last time around, he's an experienced senator, he had a wildly excited base, and incredible fundraising numbers. We aren't likely to see a more electable progressive candidate run for president for quite some time. And yet, he still lost. So if the problem is the Overton window and primaries themselves are a bit troublesome for fixing the problem, will the Never Biden movement help? Well, as we've seen, the problem with progressives automatically and reliably backing the Democratic nominee is that it gives that nominee every reason to march rightward to scoop up voters who sit in the middle between the Democrats and Republicans. If taken literally, the Never Biden movement means that progressives are committed to not vote for the Democratic nominee no matter what. This means the only way Biden can win is to march to the right and scoop up the undecided middle. By the way, we are seeing him do just that. His campaign recently picked Larry Summers as an economic advisor despite vocal opposition from progressives. He made a big show of securing Hillary Clinton's endorsement, and he's even suggested he might appoint Republicans in his government, saying, "I have had literally several hundred serious players who have been held positions in every department in the federal government who have said, including some Republicans who have said, if you win, I want to come back. I'm ready to serve." The truth is, in my opinion, the hashtag Never Biden sends the wrong message. It tells Biden that progressives will never support him, so he might as well go ahead and build a unity cabinet with the GOP. So if supporting Biden automatically hurts the progressive movement, and opposing him unconditionally hurts the progressive movement, then what are progressives to do? What is strategically the best way to move Biden toward the left? Well, some of the people who seem to be aligned with the Never Biden movement have been telling you all along. Crystal Ball, for example, despite vocally criticizing Biden, has not, as far as I've seen, said that she would never support him. She's called herself an undecided voter.
If the choice is Donald Trump or Joe Biden, you can mark me down as officially undecided.
Secular Talk's Kyle Kulinski may have stated several times now that he would not vote for Biden and that his choice is not a strategic move. But he also listed numerous reasons he would have made a different decision.
I need to be convinced Biden will not just say he's in favor of, but fight for one or two of my top 5 issues. Guess what, guys? I'm not convinced at all that he's going to do it. I'm really not. All right, I'll make an exception. If Biden picks Nina Turner or Bernie Sanders for VP, then I'll vote for him. Even though I still don't think he would do any of the things I want. If Bernie was strategic about this, Bernie could have got me to vote for Biden. If Bernie went to Biden and said, listen, man, here's a list of 10 executive orders. You have to do these within the first 100 days of your administration. If you do that, I'm going to fight as hard as I possibly can to get you elected. So he didn't do that, and he wouldn't do that. But if he did do that, I guarantee you guys, Biden either would have said, okay, I'll do these executive orders. Or Biden would say, I can't do these 5, they're a little too extreme, but I will do these other 5 you gave me. And then, Bernie could have had that piece of paper and waved it in the face of people like me and said, Look, idiot, look what you're leaving on the table if you don't vote for Biden.
Kulinski may be at the point now where he believes that there's no chance that Biden will move in the right direction, or left direction. But perhaps progressives shouldn't be so hopeless. Sure, I don't think it's likely that Biden will suddenly support Medicare for all or the Green New Deal, but I do hold out hope that with the proper incentives in place, he might do what politicians do and pivot to a principled position of supporting exactly what is most likely to get him elected and retain power. For this reason, I would like to recommend a new hashtag for the Never Biden movement, one that reflects the kind of optimism that positive change is built on. Hashtag Maybe Biden. Here's a few examples of how to put this to use on Twitter. Will Joe Biden commit to signing into law a single-payer healthcare system if it is passed by Congress, even if he'd prefer to do a watered-down public option? Hashtag Maybe Biden. I don't ordinarily support establishment hacks, but if Joe fights for UBI, this Yang lover will bother to vote IRL. Hashtag Maybe Biden. How about a green energy plan that gets us to net zero emissions before the due date set by scientists? I like the planet Earth. If you commit to keeping it habitable, I'll commit to holding my nose in November. Hashtag Maybe Biden. Hashtag Earthlife. Hashtag Delaniacs. At the end of the day, of course, whether or not you employ this hashtag is very much your decision, but it is urgent. So whatever you choose to do, when it comes to time, make sure that you are hashtag Never Biden. Now, when it comes to voting, there are a few other things that should not remain unsaid here. First, do not vote shame anyone. Everyone is perfectly entitled to vote for whomever they please, or not vote, even if that means voting for a third party. No one is required to follow my strategic advice or anyone else's. Second, elections have consequences. Being able to decide how to vote also comes with the responsibility of owning your decision. Whoever wins the next presidential election may not have absolute power, but they will be able to write executive orders, appoint Supreme Court justices, run the bureaucracy, and conduct foreign relations. The presidency is very important. Make sure that however you decide to vote, it's a decision you can live with, and that includes not voting. And finally, most important of all, you don't owe your vote to anyone. While a lot of this discussion has been about the responsibilities of voters, it's politicians who win and lose elections. The buck has to stop with our leaders. Bernie Sanders lost the Democratic primary. Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 general election. If Biden loses this one, it's his campaign's loss, his loss. So if you are a voter, even if you are a registered Democrat, it's not your job to get Biden elected. It's his job and his campaign's job to give you a reason to vote for him. Ditto with Donald Trump and Republican voters. While you must take your role as a voter seriously, at the end of the day, it's on the candidates to consider what they must do in order to get elected. As it so happens, at the moment, many progressives seem to be quite disenchanted with Biden and his campaign. So it's up to that same campaign to consider your interests, your preferences, your concerns, and decide what should they do.
Got to sort of smile a little bit, right?